Hello, good morning.
Al, it's great to see you today. Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you. Absolutely. It's a privilege and an honor. Thank you for having me.
So, before we get started, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. First
Sure.
off, right now we're living in tumultuous times. There's been the big verdict that came down in Minneapolis after
Yeah.
all that has happened. And I wanted to ask you if you could just share us with a sense with us, kind of what's going on the ground in Minneapolis.
Yeah, thank you for asking the question. Yeah, it's been really absolutely very, very difficult the last year plus, almost a year to the time when George Floyd was murdered on the streets. And it's been a very, very difficult year. I think that Minneapolis right now is trying to heal. But then we had a case where, of course, in Brooklyn Center, where a young man, Dante Wright, was shot by an officer, right? And so, it's this constant challenge around um, this trauma that you feel every day that we know within our communities, we've always known within our communities. Sometimes this injustice and these tragedies that continue to happen. And so, Minneapolis is trying to move forward. We're rebuilding. A lot of the property and the damage that happened along Lake Street in our cities are coming back. But it's going to take a long time. It's going to take time. The pain and the trauma that people feel is real. People are still out here, um, asking for justice, and and we have a lot of good people that are really working hard to make sure that their voices are heard and that the community is being heard, and that we start to look at reform in our police departments. But Minneapolis is strong, and it's going to heal. We're going to get there. It's going to take time, but this is something that everybody's felt across the country and globally. And so
Yes.
Minneapolis has an opportunity to change, and we're working towards that. And the verdicts were powerful. That never happens. You don't see something like that happen. And for three guilty verdict for Chauvin was just stunning. But it was evident, and it was the right thing. And we're grateful that that happened. So we're moving forward, and we'll continue to heal.
I appreciate you saying so. And I do want to
Right?
recognize for all the folks here today that the murder of George Floyd is something that does hang over the experience as we're looking at the new case for Parks and again, looking
Yeah.
at the idea of relevancy. How do you move beyond words into action? And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in terms of what's been going on within Minneapolis and the workforce that's under your purview. I think we're going to be
Yes.
hearing about threads of that through our conference here today with the other speakers. Before we
Yeah.
move into the keynote, let me just ask you, so your keynote is entitled Rising to the Challenges in a Difficult Year, and the
Right.
conference theme is The New Case for Parks. Anything else you'd like to provide in terms of additional context?
Yeah, I would just say that it was an incredibly challenging year, and as I go through, as you hear in my presentation, we not only dealt with the pandemic, we had the civil unrest that rose out of the murder of George Floyd. We had a proliferation of encampments, people that were unsheltered, unhoused, living in our streets in our city, and due to the riots, started flooding into our parks, looking for places of safety and respite, and it was incredibly challenging. But I will say that these are moments in the arc of history in any of our organizations within Park and Recreation that there's no question, more than ever, our parks are more important. And that's evident in what we went through here in Minneapolis. It's clear that our jobs and what we do save lives, and it's a place for healing, but it's also a place for protests and places that people will go to. They always come to our parks. So it's a time to move. It's a time to innovate. It's a time to reimagine. It's a time to think about how we in the park system change at these times. And that's what I want to share is these are the moments we move. These are the moments that we innovate and we think about our parks and what it means to the people that we serve every day. So, uh, it's, I think it's important to always keep our eyes on where we're going. So,
I think that's great, and I think that provides great context. I really do
yeah,
appreciate. I think we're fortunate to have you here with us today. At this
thank you.
point, we're going to jump into the Q and A following Superintendent Bangoura's keynote will return here for the Q&A. As Al goes through his presentation, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. If you have comments, please put them in the chat. We're going to be carrying this conversation into the Q&A when we return. So with that, I give you Al Bangoura, Rising to the Challenges During a Difficult Year, our first keynote in this year's Parks and Greenspace Conference.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Al Bangoura. I'm the superintendent of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. It is truly an honor and a pleasure to be with you today at the 20th Annual Parks and Greenspace Conference. So during this time, I would like to take this time together to talk about how Minneapolis parks evolved through a 138-year history, and how a chaotic and heartbreaking and unprecedented events that happened in 2020 and showed us that parks and open spaces are more important than ever before. So, a brief history. Minneapolis Park Board was created by the state legislature in 1883, a 138-year history. So we're very unique in that the Park Board is governed by its own elected Board of Commissioners, the wonderful people you see before you, the 9 commissioners. They appointed me as superintendent in 2019, and that's who I'm referring to when I say the Park Board. So some background. So from the very beginning, Minneapolis Park System was built around a universal park access theme, and that was basically all residents would have access to the park system. So many of the cities and lakes and creeks and southern riverfront was acquired in the early 1900s. So a lot of the park commissioners and the park leaders convinced wealthy property owners to donate or sell waterfront to build parks, also building upon, of course, this idea of legacy. Some of the things I found in the archive that they said, which was fascinating, was let us build a park and your property values will skyrocket. And as we know, homes and properties around parks have a higher value. So it was very smart, and of course it worked. So today the Park Board owns all lakefront in Minneapolis, 12 total lakes, and that's pretty incredible. So all lakefront is owned by Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. So these lakes are covered in amazing trails, 12 beaches, and of course, beautiful natural areas. And what is really truly incredible with this, as I mentioned, the 12 lakes, that all waterfront property is all public. And so when you stand on those shores or on that greenway or those paths and you look across the parkway, you see the mansions that are lined up along that. But the unique thing is that we as residents and community can actually stand and walk along the lakefronts. So Minneapolis has a really rich history in water access. The Mississippi cuts diagonally across the city. The chain of lakes travels around the southwest corner of the city. And Shingle and Bassett Creeks flow across the north, and Minnehaha Creek flows across the south. So we're connected everywhere by water. And one of the amazing things that we have is called the Grand Rounds Natural Scenic Byway, which contains 51 miles of trails. And it circles most of the city, although we're still working on the missing link. So if you look at the upper right-hand corner, there's still that connection, if you look in red, that will actually complete the Grand Rounds. And so we're working towards that. When you travel along this incredible byway, you travel along 8 lakes, 3 creeks, and 11 miles of riverfront. It's really an incredible place to travel around. And it preserves and provides easy access to the iconic natural features for the public, like Minnehaha Falls, one of our most popular and famous places that actually has millions of visitors every year. And what is amazing is that this really pretty much closely follows the original plans back in 1883 when the visionary leaders were talking about a connective trail around the entire city. So it's fascinating to look back and actually see the vision almost coming to light. So we're still working on it, but hopefully soon. And of course, along with our great water access, we have 161 neighborhood parks through our park system. And the park board has this really interesting history as I study this in acquiring what we call undesirable land. So it was like swamps, hills, ravines, outskirts of town, anything that was cheap and available, the park board bought it. And so it's pretty impressive. And it's formed what our park system is today. So the park board, an interesting fact, the park board even owned one of the first airports in Minnesota. It operated for 16 years. So actually, when you're flying into the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport, you look down at a runway, the park board still owns land underneath those runways. And that's a really interesting thing, and it's pretty cool. So this idea of our leaders talking about the strategy of aggressive land acquisition and citizen support for parks has led to a 98% of residents living within a 10-minute walk shed from every park today. And we're incredibly proud of that. So along with this vision and this idea of great access has brought accolades and support. The Trust for Public Land Park Score Index annually ranks park systems among the 100 largest cities in the USA, and it uses data on park access, on acreage, amenities, and investment, and of course, even now, talking about a racial equity index. So in those last years, they've calculated rankings of the last 9 years, and Minneapolis ranked number 1 of the 7 of the last 9 years, and we are incredibly grateful and thankful for that recognition. And also, too, of course, we make sure that we also look at our constituents and our community, the people that use our parks, and we ask for feedback. So 2019, we did a statistically valid professional survey of Minneapolis residents. 91% of them rated the park system excellent and are good, and 0% rated our park system poor. And I'm glad that we didn't get anything in the poor column, so that's great news. So that being said, in giving this kind of history, we still have a tremendous work to do, or a lot of work to do. And so we started our first, or launched our first River First project in 2010 to end inequitable waterfront access. And as we studied our history and we looked at park development, we realized that we had neglected the northern riverfront. And so it's going to take us decades to end this process, or long process, to the same thing that we did as we developed the lakes and the southern riverfront. But there has been really great progress in the last 5 years. As you see this on the slide here, there was an island and gravel beach that was lost in the 1960s due to industrial expansion. And now that is called Hall's Island, and it was restored in 2018. We also have a new riverfront park that was built with a playground, a basketball court, picnic shelter, and paths. It's called Sheridan Park. We also have an exciting new idea, a new project called Waterworks. It's a highly anticipated park project that also is opening this summer, and it features the mill remnants from the city's industrial past and an indigenous restaurant paying homage to the area's indigenous history. And we're really excited about this one opening this summer. And of course, as we talked about the north side of our city that was cut off from the river, we have this exciting project called the 26th Avenue North Overlook. And it's a new river overlook with a 35-foot tall river beacon, as you see in the picture. And it's set to open this summer. And we're really excited about that because it's the first access from the north side to the river. So with this brief history, now that I've given you this brief history, and you know a little bit about our park system, let's talk about 2020. The first crisis of 2020 was one that I know that we're, of course, all living and aware of. and familiar with, of course, is the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'm going to talk about our pandemic response. Right away, we noticed a drastic increase in trail use. Many people, with the fear of the pandemic and social distancing, we saw an incredible increase in our park system, but in particular our trail use. So the governor issued a stay-at-home order on March 25th. 2 days later, we began closing parkways to vehicles for social distancing. And what was really impressive is that we opened 8 parkways, 21 miles closed to vehicles and open to pedestrians. And these parkway closures were incredibly popular, and we were extremely proud of the fact that we did this immediately, of 21 miles of enjoyment for our community. We had also a very robust, and we were very made sure we were concerned about the public health communication. So we put a lot of effort into this. We issued more than 7,000 signs and we created 7,000 signs and posted in 4 languages across our entire park system. We did a very robust social media campaign around the pandemic. We built a COVID website, and we also wrote daily emails to update staff on what was happening with the pandemic, along with the CDC and the concerns that was happening in the city around this crisis. And we had a lot of staff, of course, because our buildings were closed, that were looking for meaningful work. And what we did was we created a program called an ambassador program. So it was our staff that was trained and retrained in public health, educators of our parks, but they were also in our parks just being advocates, sharing information, and really being the voice and listening to people and their concerns out in our community. So it was a wonderful program that we did, and we're proud of that. And of course, we started looking at virtual programs. We had more than 100 virtual programs that were offered online. We had community engagement and board meetings that shifted online, and it was actually easier for the public to engage. We had new online engagement tools, and some of those were around virtual tours to envision parks undergoing master plans. We had virtual open office hours with translators available. We had this very popular Music in the Parks series that pivoted to a virtual concert series, and we shared that on YouTube. And we also live streamed our Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. Day program, which recognizes outstanding volunteers in our community. So we did some really great work around our virtual programming. We also shifted to thinking about our in-person programming. We had classes and programs that moved outside and adjusted to social distancing. We created new programs as free alternatives to canceled activities. Some of the programs that we did was called Fun on the Run, which staff brought youth activities to parks during the summer and weekdays, weekly drop-in sports clinics, and we offered coaching in volleyball, baseball, and softball. And we had this really cool thing called Adventure Hubs. And of course, then we had our very popular Movies in the Parks, which pivoted to a smaller series of drive-ins movies in our parking lots. And that was really an exciting one that you see there along the Mississippi River. And of course, as many of you know, I'm sure the experience through your park system, if you have golf courses, it was a great year for golf. People got reconnected to golf, which was really exciting. And it was struggling for a while there, but we had a 40% increase in rounds played, which is amazing. And we also had a $2.1 million increase in our revenue. And we're very grateful for that because our enterprise fund and our services were struggling. So we're very happy about that $2.1 million that helped our park system. And also we put in place, as you see from this slide, new procedures and processes to keep everyone safe. And our staff did an amazing job in building these barriers, these places to make sure that all residents and staff would at least have a sense of ease when they would come in and participate in our program. So grateful for our staff. So our next crisis, 2 months into the pandemic, we hit our next crisis, which was the civil unrest. So on May 25th, 2020, George Floyd was killed on Memorial Day. The peaceful protest that devolved into riots and hundreds of buildings were damaged or destroyed in our city. We knew immediately that our parks were connected and were part of the city. Our parks are the fabric of our community and our city. What you see here is one of our parks, Phelps Park, was 1 block from where George Floyd died. And of course, we felt this incredible and really great responsibility because parks are vital to the civic movement of people into the city. We strongly support, of course, the First Amendment right to gather at any public space and to express your opinion, your voice. Parks hosted rallies, protests, marches, and even celebrations. But they were also, as I stated earlier with our parkways and our parks, there were also spaces to heal and to get fresh air during incredibly stressful times. For me, professionally and personally, it was a very challenging time. It was this balance of responsibility for running a park system and my personal experience as a Black man and my son and my wife. And how do I participate? How do I move forward in a way that could help this community? Kept asking the question, can park spaces engage in an effort? And of course we can. And of course we can do our part. And of course, I saw this as an opportunity to make sure that our parks are available at all times for people to just to be and to heal. So some of the things we did is we left the lights on at night during the rioting so people felt a sense of ease. We sent our violence prevention teams to the rallies and to hotspots and to parks to be connected to our community and to work with our youth or anybody that had questions about our parks or what was happening in the city. We recognized and created a community connections and violence prevention team. They were a community-centered approach to collective trauma and to violence and to just, again, be present in our community. We had our Park Ambassador program, which expanded into customer service. It makes parks more welcoming and residents and to visitors visiting our park system. And then the next crisis that occurred, remember all these things were happening at the same time, the pandemic, George Floyd, and of course now encampments. So our third crisis popped up in just weeks after civil unrest ended with an unprecedented number of encampments. Early in June, hundreds of people experiencing homelessness moved into the hotel, the Sheraton Hotel, during the riots. There were people who were hidden, that were under bridges or in places that no one really recognized, and they were never seen before as they were now. People were evicted from the hotel on January or June 10th, and some started a nearby encampment at Powderhorn Park. On June 12th, 25 tents now formed an encampment at Powderhorn. I originally at that time issued a vacate for the folks that were there based on the provision within the governor's executive order on size, since we never had an encampment of this size before in one of our parks. Notices to vacate were rescinded in a response to the governor's office and also to the executive order 20-55, which they interpreted that I wasn't doing the right thing at that particular moment. And also, of course, from the concerns around park commissioners, community members. And so we rescinded the vacate. On June 17th, 5 days later, 180 tents were at Powderhorn Park. The board passed along at that exact time a resolution declaring we're going to provide refuge space for people experiencing homelessness while working with partners to identify long-term housing solutions. On June 27th, we met with the governor on a Zoom call, and it was determined at that time that the vacate order was valid, and we did have the authority to demobilize an encampment based on its size. On July 1st, we had then at that point 44 encampments across our city. Powderhorn had 2 encampments on both the west and east side of the park, 568 tents total, the largest encampment in Minnesota history at that park. So just to be clear, we believe very clearly that everyone experiencing homelessness is vulnerable and deserves to be treated with dignity and respect and compassion. But we as a park system didn't have we were not adequately trained nor had the staff resources to serve that many unsheltered people living in our parks. But we were involved with the city in multi-agencies, the county, the state, the Department of Health, Public Works, but we were typically a sideline player. Now this was in our lap, and we were the main player. So we obviously participated in the multi-agency task force, and then we, of course, built from the ground up policies from scratch and on the fly to address this crisis. So we provided restrooms, we provided hand washing stations, trash containers, we created encampment policies. We reorganized staffing to manage the sites. We had daily visits from our community outreach team to help folks connect to social services and to resources. It was incredibly difficult work. It was not easy. Staff were harassed. We were dealing with biohazards and thousands of needles. Some of the safety issues that arose were in fights, shootings, overdoses, and sexual assaults. Unfortunately, 5 people died in our encampments, 4 from overdoses, and we had, unfortunately, a homicide at our last encampment in January of 2021. So talk about the permits real quickly. July 15th, the board passes a resolution that basically gave me the authority to solve this crisis. They said, Superintendent, fix this. So we created a process that issued encampment permits in neighborhoods and volunteer groups. We addressed encampments from the safety issues. We reduced the number of parks from temporary encampments to no more than 20, and we limit the number of tents to no more than 25 in a park. So we issued 15 park permits that had encampment permits. We disbanded more sites disbanded in October as temperatures plummeted and snow fell and cold weather set in. We wanted to make sure people got out of the cold and were safe. And so during that time, we did disband 6 parks due to health and safety concerns and what was rising in those encampments. By 2021 of January, we had 0 encampments in our park. So a quick question to all of you. Did you encounter issues with park encampments in 2020? I'd be very interested. So moving forward, some programs were born out of the necessity during the pandemic and will still stick around. Virtual programs, especially environmental programs in our gardens, will remain. They were a huge success. Adventure hubs, I mentioned earlier, those free outdoor gear that gives rental to do-it-yourself outdoor adventures for 14 neighborhood parks will continue. We implemented a new tree planting procedures for social distancing that actually made the process quicker. So we're extremely excited about that. We plant 9,000 trees every year, and so this made it a lot quicker for us to plant those trees. And we purchased new gates to continue parkway closures. We invested $160,000. And this is a new way of thinking about roads, closing them for weekends, maybe for events, but we're now going to put permanent infrastructure in instead of renting it to help with this idea of road closures or open streets. And then, of course, our popular drive-in movies were also very successful and will continue. In fact, we're having 2 screenings scheduled at that location, pictured, as you see, along the Mississippi and the riverfront, next month for the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. Really cool. And also, which was very important, was staff morale. Incredibly important to me. I did multiple series of staff appreciation videos by department during this time. I was incredibly grateful for that, showing appreciation for our staff and the incredible work and the difficulties they experienced during 2020. And of course, we did a reorganization. We didn't stand still. We did a new development engine team, which is the program administrator that does quality over quantity programs, meaning that we're looking at trends and research and surveys, innovation, CAPRA, accreditation things. We're looking at that very closely. We also devised a new data analytics team and insights team to look at data and insights to help guide us in strategy and decision making. And we're very excited about that. And of course, we developed, which I'm very proud of, this new community connections and violence prevention team. We're very excited about that. And now that it was born out of the work that they had done during the pandemic. And now we have a whole new department that's looking at de-escalation and trauma and community approach. Instead of police arriving, this team now arrives in our parks and does great work around our community. So, and we're not going to forget our emphasis on youth. That remains an organizational priority. They had a really tough year with school closures and limited socialization. So we're really focused on our youth. We expanded our youth opportunities and prioritized teamwork jobs. Not only put money in their pockets, but to give them opportunities around the world of green infrastructure and green jobs, but also a pathway to opportunities and jobs. We also have youth mentorship. We have our 12 youth line staff that are out there engaged with our youth in multiple ways of guiding them and giving them information and just being a presence for them in their day-to-day activities at the park. We also have night owls programs, which takes youth from out the street in the evenings and brings them into the park with multiple activities, but of course mentorship, but STEAM programs and activities, and just engaging our youth in the evening so they have a place that they're safe and off the streets. And of course, street reach conflict mediators, folks that are out in our park every day, working with our youth in our community to help guide them and give them a voice and an ear when they're having a tough time, especially during this time of pandemic, civil unrest, and everything that we've been dealing with in Minneapolis. So I'm very proud of this group. And of course, micro grants. These are grants that are $15,000 limit. We've invested over $300,000 where the community submits a grant to the park on new innovative ways that they can work with our staff and our kids, but it is addressing our community and our park staff and working together to think of new innovative and creative ideas to engage our youth. So we're very proud of that. And our new creation spaces, which are taught by creative industry professionals. We're building 4 of them throughout our system, and they're going to do everything from micro entrepreneur business to STEAM programs, art, music, design, architecture, anything you can think of that's creative spirit. We are now building 4 new ones in our rec centers, and we hope to do 6 at the end, but this is a huge undertaking. We're very excited about that. And of course, the pillars that we put in forward: creation spaces, youth employment, nature programs, cycling, community gardening, and intergenerational centers of excellence. They're just the pillars for us to move forward in ideas of how we transform our rec centers to innovative centers of excellence, or incubators of innovation in our rec centers. So with that, I'm going to close. And I want to say that I truly believe growth happens through crisis. These moments to retool, to reimagine, to reinvent, to recreate, and to innovate. These are the moments that make you move with a sense of urgency born out of crisis moments. 2020 was a watershed moment, and we have an opportunity through Park and Recreation to impact and save lives through what we do in our profession. Parks have a unique capacity to offer such a wide range of restorative outlets to people, opportunities to exercise and to play, to learn and discover, relax in and connect to the natural world. It was magnified during such a difficult year. I believe it makes the case for parks stronger than ever. For me, this has been an amazing profession, and I'm fortunate to work alongside brilliant, talented, and passionate people like you all. Thank you for allowing me to be with you today, and I now look forward to your questions. And again, I appreciate your time, and thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. So I just wanted to share, Superintendent Bangoura will be joining us for a couple of questions. Before he does, I just wanted to share a few thoughts that I had. Number one, I think the idea that change happens through crisis is something that Al Bangoura talked about, and talking about how their park system has been relevant to the issues that are going on right now in Minneapolis. I do also want to recognize we've had some great questions that have come up in the Q&A, and I will address a couple of things. There was a question about whether or not the Open Streets program will continue, and those questions were posed before the superintendent shared that they have invested in the road closing signage and the equipment that allows us to look at their parkways as flexible spaces. And when he returns, I'd love to hear more about how that plays out in practice. But he did share that they made a significant investment to make sure that that wasn't something that they were just looking at as a temporary use and something to get through the pandemic, but something that was ongoing. So I did want to mention that. I also wanted to recognize the Community Connections and Violence Prevention Unit that was stood up within the Parks Department. Superintendent Bangoura has shared that when you look at all the different departments between the Parks Board, that it's almost a mini city in terms of all of the different staff. And when you have folks that are dealing with some of the law enforcement issues, and the way that he described their approach to trauma care for those who are experiencing homeless, I think, is something to be applauded. And the idea of doing it on a scale so that you're addressing those issues, not just in an individual park, but throughout the system, is something that I think is very compelling and something that I would like to learn more about. I know that in Atlanta, we've had some very positive efforts to deal with issues of people experiencing homelessness at Woodruff Park that we featured at this conference. And I see that being something where they have a robust staff that have been trained in trauma care, who are that front line. And the words that Superintendent Bangoura mentioned, that this becomes their first response as opposed to bringing in law enforcement, I think is something that suggests that if you want a different outcome, you need to do things differently. And I applaud Superintendent Bangoura for their efforts to come up with comprehensive ways to address the different issues that they've been facing within their city. So beyond that, I'm taking a look here in terms of the questions that we have from folks. The athletics are a large part of Parks for Kids, but not all children participate in sports. What other activities are available for teens, which again, I think is something that does remind me of the work that's been happening in Atlanta with the Comprehensive Master Plan, Recreation and Parks for All, and the efforts within Atlanta to look not just within the existing users of parks, but ways that different key segments that might not be fully engaged might be able to rise to the challenge of getting involved. So I think that that's something that I look to in our efforts here in Atlanta. I also want to mention before we move beyond this segment that I think that the example that we've seen from Minneapolis gives us an idea of an effort that has dedicated funding in place and a wide array of programs, gives us something that when we look towards world class, that's something that is a big strength within the Minneapolis system that has allowed them to play an innovative role. I do see a number of different things that I see in Minneapolis that I see that we're doing right here in Atlanta. So that makes me very proud to be part of this parks movement and the work that we're doing. I would suggest that at this point that we do not have Al Bangoura that is coming back right now. I would suggest that people might. Oh, you do. We actually have Al Bangoura joining us, so let's jump back into the Q&A.
The odds of that
Life
happening.
is what happens while making other plans.
Yeah, it just froze. My apology. But I'm back.
That's great. Well, let's jump right into it. There's a question that's on the screen. Are there any plans to keep parkways closed to cars once parks are fully open again?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, we do plan on doing that at some point. Right now, there's been, like I said before, an incredible response to parkway closures. And people just want to have that space again to be able to just recreate. And I think the experience for 21 miles of, I always call it open instead of closing, but opening it to people.
Right.
The experience that people had during that was really incredible. I have never seen, and I was out walking these parkways, people that were just engaged with each other and talking and feeling this sense of reconnection again to nature. And also people slowed down, which was, if we understand anything about open streets and about what it means, people slowed down and they enjoyed the parkways in a different way. So yes, we plan on doing it. Once we get the infrastructure in too, we can be able to do this on a more regular basis, but we are planning on closing parkways during the year for different reasons. But yeah, we plan on doing it.
That's excellent. So the next question raises some questions regarding people who are experiencing homelessness and the encampments. So did the increased visibility of encampments increase political will to adequately address homelessness in Minneapolis? Have you worked with the housing department to continue to find solutions for those needing housing? I'd like to hear more about cross-department collaboration. And kind of I'll add on to that, that you mentioned this unit that deals with community connections and violence prevention and trauma care. Maybe you could talk not just about other departments, but also how you built capacities during this difficult time.
Right. Yeah, first question I'll answer real fast that absolutely the visibility. The movement was called the Minneapolis Sanctuary Movement. It's kind of this group that would basically kind of coalesced around unsheltered, unhoused people that were living in our community. So the movement absolutely did bring this to light. There's no question. When you had encampments in 44 park sites and every park across the city, you couldn't ignore it anymore, right? And so there's no question that we had to do a lot of work. What I noticed from the state, county, and city, because the park board wasn't in the housing, right? We're the park system, but the agencies around us, they got more hotels, they had more housing, they have this thing called tiny homes, like an Avivo thing, where they have these homes that they built over 100 in a like a warehouse structure, and these homes were inside of them. They opened up more opportunities for people now to get into shelter and the housing. So yes, it did motivate the state, the county, and the city to do more work around this, which they did. They invested millions of dollars into dealing with this crisis. And so that's what helped us actually to get folks into places before winter came and also into January. So yes, and we will continue to work with our partners across the state, county, and city. There's no question. And the cross-departmental work and collaboration will continue. My work internally around the community connections and violence prevention team was a new team that was developed out of a community outreach team that we had in our department. So now we have an entire department devoted to part of the portfolio is encampments, but also it's in response to trauma, violence prevention, de-escalation, working with our community. So it's a community approach to anything that's happening in our parks, and in particular on encampments. So the first call that 911 makes is not an officer sometimes responding to a problem that's not necessarily a police response, but it is about a community approach to a critical situation happening in our community. It could be a child, it could be an adult, it could be an encampment, it could be anything that we see that this new team approaches in a way that's a person, a human connection, as sometimes not an officer, but a person. And so this team now is working on strategies and engagement around all of our parks when it comes to any of these critical situations that happen. And we have a whole plan that works on that. So that team has been working on multiple approaches around, sustaining sort of a community approach to people.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. There's a final question that's listed here, but before that, I'm going to call an audible because our time got cut a little short, and I wanted to kind of broaden from where you had described the response to encampments and your efforts to build this new unit. And when we spoke earlier in the year, you had shared some of the changes that had happened within the department, looking at cultural competency issues and issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then kind of a follow-up question is, since the George Floyd verdict and the way that this conversation has escalated, number one, what were you doing before, and what has changed since?
Yeah, we have done tremendous work. I mean, really back since 2011. We've worked with GARE, the Government Alliance in Race and Equity, back in 2016 to 18. We have our racial equity internal influencers since 2017. And all of this work is really an internal look at our organization as we start to think about how we move forward and providing the services, but understanding cultural competencies, diversity, equity, what it all means. So we did a very, very deep dive internally around our organization to make sure that we are understanding not only the changing of our community, but the changing of what's happening around the world, but in particular that we're doing the work that needs to be done to address multiple issues that we know that's happening around our country. We had racial equity 101 training. So everyone that comes into our organization, they go through this racial equity training, understanding what it means. We have onboarding that is now part of what we do when we hire new staff coming in. Everything from ordinances, all of our ordinances that have been in existence since 1883. We've gone back at our ordinances now to make sure that those ordinances are valid, they're not discriminatory. We've done this incredible work around all of those ordinances and changing them, either getting rid of them, changing them, or adapting them to now, the language now. The language that's in there or the practices aren't discriminatory. So everything that we do from our MPP 20, which is all of our matrix that goes around our rehabilitation and also of all of our properties and our CIPs, also in all of our programming, is all looked at through a racial equity lens. In fact, that was the first in the country that looked at all of our master planning, all of our comp plans. It's all done through a racial equity lens. So we literally went through our entire organization on every level and put the work in, and it was a long process and hard. And I'll give credit to, of course, I want to make sure Superintendent here at the time previous to me, Jane Miller, who did some great work with that. And so we continue on doing that work. And I want to make sure I give credit to that. But it's been years, 10 years of work. And so the continuum along that has been happening. So by the time that we got to this point when George Floyd was murdered, we had many, our staff had an understanding for years around how we as an organization address these issues. We also had the opportunity among our organization to all work together. The BIPOC people that were in our organization that were going through trauma and struggling through this, as I was too, we had an opportunity to go on a Zoom call and all get together through our internal influencers. It's a group of all of us that meet and work through and talk through multiple issues, not just George Floyd, but what's happening around the country, how we program, how we address racial equity. So that's just a brief understanding. The Community Connections and Violence Prevention team was easy then to move out of that because we understood the work that had to be done. And we knew that changing community outreach to community violence prevention was critical because of what we saw happening in our community and the importance of our parks. So this was this idea of also bridging between police and community. So this was a way that we then moved towards this more compassionate, community connective piece that was important from our staff, who were just wonderful people that would then be in the community addressing trauma, violence, de-escalation, talking to residents, doing town hall kind of meetings. So this team was the answer to a lot of the things that we saw happening around our community, that we as a park system can engage in a different way that'd be meaningful and human-centric. So this new department that's what their mission is. And also, of course, encampments. I hope that answered that.
That's very helpful, and I do appreciate the longitude of your efforts. And mentioning Jane Miller, she is no stranger to our conference, so she has been with us in the past. So I appreciate you holding her up to the light, and I really appreciate your leadership and your candor here today. One last question before we part ways. Share with us, in your role as superintendent, what brings you joy, and what are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a great question. So I would say probably joy is my family, because that was one of the most difficult things. Last year was incredibly challenging. And so, there's that grounding that I needed in my life, and they were amazing. And I will be honest, I saw the park system in a different way too at that time, because there was moments where sitting on Zoom calls for 12 hours a day, just dealing with one crisis after another. So my peace and the opportunity to walk with my son and my wife, exit out the door. We had walked into a park and went down to the Rose Garden around Lake Harriet. And so I experienced what people were experiencing, the healing and that joy of being outside and seeing, the great work that we're doing in the park system, but experiencing it as a resident, right? It was an incredible thing for me, and it was a healing thing for me. I would say the biggest accomplishment, and I know you and I talked about this, And I thought about this deeply, and I thought, and honesty, it was really the people of this organization. And I thought about this. We're building these creation spaces that are really unique. $400,000 investment into micro entrepreneur businesses and STEAM, and all these really wonderful things that we're doing out there. Everything creative within these spaces, which is reimagining the civic commons, right, or reimagining our park system. But I'll be honest with you, the people in this organization and what they did and how they innovated, how they rethought everything, how we didn't stop, we moved, we kind of thought we thought about this organization in a different way and how to move forward based on this arc of history and this time that was happening. So I'm incredibly proud of the people that work for this organization, all the people that are around me every day, the people on the front lines that were dealing with very difficult situations, how they were nimble, how they innovated, how they changed. And in my sort of vision, how I reorganized the organization, how they moved with that, how they looked at innovation around data analytics and how they thought about this new community connections team. All of that work was the people. And that for me brought me the biggest accomplishment, or the biggest, I'm more proud of that than anything else. And the challenging year we had.
Well, just hearing you say that makes me fills me with a sense of pride from our frontline folks within the parks departments that we work with, and the way that they have, as you've described, become different people living through this experience, but showing up and putting in the work. So I really appreciate all of the work of our public sector folks. I know a number of city council members are also on this call and attending this conference, and of course, Mayor Bottoms opening up this session shows that I think leadership is an important part of this conversation. Another part is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And so putting in the time to kind of get where you need to be, part of it is setting your sights on the horizon. So I really do appreciate you being here with us today. Thank you for your time and just rolling up your sleeves and engaging with us. This has been a great opening session. Thanks for all that you do for parks and for people within your fair city, and all the great work that you do.
Thank you so much, Michael. I really appreciate it. I'm again, I would say before, I'm incredibly honored to be here. It's been a privilege, and I look forward to. I will throw out to anyone. Please send me emails and contact me. I'd love to hear from anyone because in this profession, you learn from others. You know, they say what professionals steal, amateurs borrow, right? So I look forward to folks connecting with me, and thank you, everyone. And it's really been a privilege. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thank you. So for those that are paying attention to the time, we have a shorter break than what was initially planned. I do want to recognize, I think that Al Bangoura did a great job of sticking around for a little bit longer for the Q&A. Before we take a break, I'm going to turn it over to our 2020 Inspiration Award winner and Park Pride board member, Sophia Bork. And we've got a short video from her where Sophia will introduce 2 of this year's 5 Inspiration Award honorees. And shortly thereafter, we will be jumping back into things. So I do want to recognize we have a shorter break than what was initially planned. I do also want to mention that we have, don't forget to make a gift to Park Pride to be entered into the REI glamping package drawing. And may the odds be in your favor. In any case, we'll be back here in the main hall at 10:15 for our next keynote, Kofi Boone. Thank you.